Okay, we're back out of camera and live again in the public domain. The council and staff received information from the auditor that will be applied accordingly. And we appreciate the efforts of the auditor in helping us move forward after 2021. And we know that the financial staff will follow that letter. So moving on with our agenda this evening, and we thank Ms. Mahone. I'm not sure if you're sticking around for the next, it is the finance report pertaining to your audit, which you're more than welcome to stay for. So the next motion is moved by Councillor Foti and seconded by Councillor Maybe that Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the 2021 audited consolidated financial statements, and that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the 2021 audited trust fund financial statements, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the transfer of the 2021 surplus in the amount of $18,886 to the working fund reserve 50% and the contingency reserve 50%. Discussion on this motion. Go ahead, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, through your worship. Just an item for clarification for myself, but on the form budget to actuals, if right at the top, non-departmental spending, can you just really highlight what that entails? And the reason I'm asking is I'm just looking at what looks like a significant increase over 2021 in the expenses.
Through your worship. So non-departmental is mainly grants that we receive. So I'm just going to actually pull it up here. But the main thing is our OMPF funding flows through there. So that's the main source of revenue in there. And then some of the other grants we receive, so OCIF, the COVID funding, federal gas tax. So they come in as revenue and then they go out as transfers to reserve funds. So what you see is we actually have higher revenue and expense than what we budgeted, because like, again, for federal gas tax, we receive more than we thought. So we get higher revenue, but then we flow it through to the reserves. So on the cash basis, that's an expense and it shows higher expenses, but the main expense there, the only expense in there is transfers to reserve.
Okay. Just that actually, my last question would be, when we have our deferred revenues, which are the obligatory, when that money is transferred back, does it go into income and revenue, or does it go directly to funding a capital project that's appropriate for that tax? How do I see that? How do I see where that money's going?
Through your worship. So it kind of depends which statement you're looking at. If you're looking at the audited financial statements, so the accrual basis, if you look at the income statement or the statement of operations, just trying to find the page number for you. Statement of operations and municipal equity. So if you look down on the page there, there's government transfers of $515,070. I'm not sure if you see that on that statement, but that's actually the capital revenue that we've used in the year from the obligatory that, not just from obligatory, that's capital revenue. Some's coming from obligatory that we use to fund capital projects in 2021.
So when we would have on our budget, for instance, would it show on there that such and such was coming from deferred revenue, or would it show it coming from an obligatory reserve? That's really my question. How do I track it?
Through your worship. So in the budget, I don't show the statements the same way, like on the accrual basis, more the cash basis. So in the budget document, it would be more shown as like, these are the reserve fund balances. These are the transfers budgeted to go into that reserve, budgeted to come out of that reserve and ending balance. So it'd be more through you would just see that reserve transferred money to a capital project, and that's how we funded that project.
Okay. And again, it's just because I'm not that familiar. I don't have an alphabet after my name. So when I see the audit when I see in this report that there are the reserve fund, those are all discretionary reserve funds that I see in that form put in this report. Is that correct? There are no obligatory funds listed in that in that reserve fund. See, it's down toward the bottom here.
So through your worship, the schedule one, the continuity of reserves and reserves at the back. Yeah. So that's our equity or our discretionary reserves. So
Yeah.
none of the obligatory show there. They
Okay.
show somewhere separate on these statements.
Okay, and where on these statements, where is that? Where do they show?
So on these statements, they're on the balance sheet as deferred revenue. That's where the obligatory
Okay,
show.
as deferred revenue. So one has to know that that's where they're at. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Jameson.
But just to the counselor's point, and now I've confused myself, or maybe you have. Deferred revenue is deferred, but it is revenue at some point in this fiscal year. So it must be showing up in the budget with respect to revenue against expense.
Through your worship. So the it's shown as deferred revenue because we don't recognize it until we pull it out of the fund and actually fund a capital project with it. On the accrual basis financial statements, that's how it flows through. It flows as deferred revenue on the balance sheet. Like other revenue we might receive and not spend in the year. It's deferred. It's a liability.
Okay, so it's been too long since I've looked at other statements. It's then that the deferred revenue, but you already have projects in the capital budget, that the assumption is the deferred revenue arrives and we use that to finance things, correct? So at some point it is part of the program once it's in the door. And that's been anticipated in our budget, is it not?
Through your worship, except in the case where we got like this top up amount from federal gas tax or Canada Community Building Fund or whatever you want to call it now. So that was an unexpected payment that we received last year. So it is sitting in deferred revenue because we didn't budget to spend it in 2021. So then when we do pull it out of that reserve, it will get recognized as revenue on the income statement as it funds the capital work through the budget.
One final comment, because the penny just dropped. Thank you. Thank you. Business I used to be in, nobody plays a note perfect concert, but this is about as good as it gets, as far as I'm concerned, for a financial statement and a performance. So thank you.
Councillor Fody.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. I'd like to ask our treasurer a hypothetical question. Given this year's rapid rise in gas prices, how do you see that affecting our gas tax?
$1 million question. That's a good one.
Through your worship. So I believe, and I'd have to look into this to be honest, to tell you for sure. So I can look into it and get back to you. And unless Katie knows, and she's welcome to jump into and correct me, but I think the gas tax on fuel is more directed to the transit funding envelopes. So I'm not sure how much impact the gas prices will actually affect our funding coming from the federal government for that, which is now the Canada Community Building Fund. I'm not sure. I haven't seen anywhere where it's being impacted, but I'm not 100% sure, so I can look into it.
And
Through you, Your Worship, I might just add to that the 2022 amount, I think right now is set. I believe the treasurer had mentioned that earlier. To the extent that there is an impact and the government decides that they want to increase that amount, they would do similar to what they did in 2021, where they did a one-time top-up payment, which doesn't typically come out until late fall, November-ish timeframe.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. Katie, if that's the case, when is the fiscal year end for gas tax to be calculated?
Through you, Your Worship. So the fiscal year end, what the ministry runs on, is different than the townships. However, there's no set in stone. They can make a determination really at any point in the year. If they're forecasting larger amounts than were anticipated, they might put it out earlier or later. There's really no definitive time frame that could be projected or forecasted at this point. There's no information currently that would suggest that there would be a top-up payment, but like we saw last year, fiscal 2021, there was no information, and then very quickly there was an announcement. So there isn't often a lot of lead time to these announcements.
Thank you.
Okay, any for, oh, Councillor Oki.
Thank you, Worship, and through you, um, Madam Treasurer, given the nervousness in the country about the rise in interest rates, we happen to be in a very good position of having a significant reserve. Is the money we have in reserve set in stone in any kind of investment, or do we have some discretion about reinvesting it at a better rate? I know we're restricted in the range of investments we can use, but I have had occasion to question people about a certain reserve in a certain other area of the township that was left to molder in a bank account. So I'm wondering, we might get a significant windfall just from GICs.
Go ahead.
Through your worship. So it's something I haven't had time to look at yet. So I've talked to the deputy treasurer actually, and we've talked about, we need to update our investment policy if we want to invest some of the reserve fund money. I also would feel more comfortable investing once I had a financial plan that I knew better when we actually needed to draw money out and what money we needed in the reserves for what year. So I honestly, we have not got there yet where we've been looking at investing it. I agree, though, it would be obviously very prudent of us to invest instead of having it just sitting in the bank. But unfortunately, we just haven't got that far.
Any further comments or questions? I might just bookend all of the discussion at this point before I call the question, just to say that my meeting with the auditor the other day was probably one of the best meetings that I've had since becoming mayor of this township. And I know I eagerly shared the news with the fellow councillors before we saw the report, but to say that I was proud of the staff and the information from senior management that has come across the desk to come forward for us to make decisions, both, recently and the last couple of years, it makes our job so much easier. To handle a budget, like Councillor Jameson said, within less than 20,000, both capital and operating, is astounding to me. I know that there's a little bit of luck thrown in there, but there's a lot of skill. Moreover, when I was speaking with the auditor and asked offhandedly what our reserves were, and she said, oh, about 9.5, I pretty much almost fell out of my chair. And as I spoke to her about the fact that the last audit done before we took office in 2017, our reserves were at 3.9 million. And no real financial plan. We hadn't kept up with inflation over 10 years, only 1 year out of 10. And we literally were bleeding our reserves dry with no real financial plan going forward. Thank goodness we found the treasurer that we did when we did. And we're grateful that she continues to work for us. So thank you. But more importantly, to use Councillor Jameson's comment, it is a concert. All the senior managers that bring the budgets forward, that help inform everything, and then manage those budgets year over year, line by line. It's a lot of work. So to come forward with a small surplus is a real good thing. Not to mention the fact that during COVID, we've lost a considerable amount of the revenues from the casino. Luckily, we had started to wean ourselves off of that previous to COVID, which made things a lot easier for us as a municipality. But even in having to deal with that, we still managed to amass the reserves we have with the big projects coming forward, like the Ivy Lee Wharf, like the fire station that needs to come forward, not to mention the laundry list of other projects that will come forward and continue to need to be funded. So the work of the past is now coming to fruition. And with an election coming up in the fall, my hope is that regardless of the outcome of that particular election, I'm very confident in saying that I know that we've left it better than we found it. So thank you. Councillor Olkey, go ahead.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to echo all your comments. I won't do that, but I also feel it's meet for us as councillors to recognize your courage and your prudence in having the courage to step forward and say, we have to be very cautious about the casino. We cannot rely on that the way we did. And although certain quarters said you were scaremongering, you were absolutely right. And that took courage, and that took foresight and wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Olkey. I didn't realize I would be proven right so early, so quickly. But it was one of the things that I know that didn't make me popular at the beginning. But nonetheless, I appreciate the comments. And the good news is that going forward, we won't have to borrow as much because, or dependent on what this council decides to do for some of the projects we know we have on the go. So thank you again. So there's still a motion on the floor. I'll get off my soapbox. Thank you very much. All those in favor of the motion at hand, please signify. All those opposed? And we're carried. Thank you very much. So next on the agenda is planning report SR-061-22 operations for regulating short-term rentals. Motion comes forward from Councillor Jameson, seconded by Councillor Foti. That committee of the whole recommends that council directs staff to proceed with public consultation over the summer fall 2022 to gain a broader understanding of the community concerns / opinions regarding the operation of short-term rentals and the issues to be addressed to assist council in determining the preferred approach for regulation and enforcement, and that staff prepare an information document on existing township bylaws and enforcement that are relevant to short-term rentals to assist the public, and that staff report to council in the first quarter of 2023 with a summary of the input received through the public consultation with staff's recommendations. Discussion on this motion? Councillor Groh.
Thank you. And through you, your worship, I've done a good deal of reading on this, and I noticed that many municipalities throughout Ontario do consider short-term rentals as commercial properties, and they have taken their lead from that concept. What are we currently regarding them as? Thank you.
Through your worship, currently they are undefined within our zoning bylaw and our official plan. So based on the policy review that we have done, the first step, if we do move forward with regulation, would be to define them in the zoning bylaw, define them in the official plan, and establish a policy framework from which then any regulation would fall.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Groh?
Yes, at this time, we're considering them undefined.
Yes.
Okay. No, that's fine. I think just a comment, really. In reading this report and numerous others, I do see that the options seem to flow from, you have the official plan and zoning bylaw, and then, of course, you have the concepts of regulation or registration. And then I've noticed here tracking companies. We have one listed here. Is that what Granitus is that a
That's
tracking
correct. That
company?
was one we met with,
Okay.
just to get more information.
Yeah, because I was reading of another one up in somewhere where I was born and raised. So these tracking companies, is that something that would sort of come back to us at council, whether we want to pursue that? Because we're just figuring out, we're just delving into how we want to approach this.
Yes, so through your worship, one of the things that we wanted to make sure we looked at in reviewing this
Mhm.
was the different levels of regulation that different municipalities have taken. So some have taken the approach where they have relied on their own bylaw enforcement staff. Many of those have bylaw enforcement departments with multiple officers and the resources to be able to do that. The third-party providers that are used by a number of municipalities, while they monitor online listings to ensure that those that are listed are actually licensed in a municipality that regulates it. In many cases, some of those do deal with low-level compliance issues, but there's always the responsibility of the municipality that if an issue of non-compliance is identified, that there's a local enforcement resource to be able to go out and follow up on those when they're identified. So the third-party providers are sort of a high level, and then there's still resources at the local level that are required. And that's one of the things that really stood out in looking at this, is that of the municipalities that do establish policy for this, some establish just the policy framework, some establish the policy framework and then follow up with the licensing. And some follow up with the licensing as well as the third-party monitoring software provider. But in each case, it's tailored to the local context based on the input that's received and the problems that are identified and the level of regulation that is being identified at the local level. So there's still a lot of work to do, in my opinion, in terms of moving forward with this to define what the approach should be.
Just a further comment to that. Thank you. In my reading, and again, it gets back to the area I grew up in, which is the Lake Huron shore.
Mhm.
And there is a problem up there, but they're talking thousands of STRs. We're talking in this township at 107 at this time, if I ballpark that correctly, that we're aware of.
Yes.
So it is quite possible that this township is not headed, the freight train is not headed toward thousands as it is up on the Lake Huron shores. It's quite possible that that won't happen. And therefore, when we set our goals moving forward, what are our goals? And that was one of the documents I believe you've included in here, which is the a municipal guidance or something on STRs. At any rate, I read it, and it's the place to start. What are your goals? You know, you're not just out to regulate or register. What is it you're trying to accomplish? So I just want to make that point. We're going to be determining our goals, and I hope through this public consultation that that's our focus. What are our goals? Because every other report, it mentioned other reports that said the people who respond to these things are the people who have had nuisances or nuisance complaints. You know, they're the people who are the stakeholders and those people who would have a short-term rental. So I'm not sure that how do we assure that we're getting as broad an opinion base as possible. And I know you've highlighted mail outs, inclusions with tax forms, and so on. Is it possible after tonight, even if we say this is great and carry, it would be possible perhaps to set up an information or a session, a public meeting? Would that be still possible? That sort of thing could happen.
Yeah.
Could.
Through your worship, the recommendation around communication and the communication process that's identified in the report at this point is preliminary.
Mhm.
It's not written in stone at all. It's very preliminary. And we are currently reviewing other municipalities and other townships that are currently undertaking the consultation process or have completed it to understand what they've done, what's been successful, areas where there may have been some criticisms so that we can learn from what other people have done. And as you said, we want to make sure that we get the broad population, the broader segment, so that we can get a better understanding of the matter. So absolutely, those are all things that we can look at to make sure that
Yeah.
we reach out as far as we can.
Thank you very much.
I have Councillor Maybe and then Councillor Jameson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Director of Planning. I know, having read it, the OPP, the OP says, maybe it's close, that if it's a 30-day rental or less. So that's one thing that it actually said. And the public consultation, I think, is very vital to us, you know, to try to get everybody's input from all over this this issue. The other thing that I found out today is I happen to have somebody that works with me who does Airbnbs all the time, and that the actual Airbnb, they have rules and regulations for each rental property. And typically it's on the owner of the property to enforce those rules. Now, that having said that, there are other platforms that are available for people to rent their premises, but it does allude to there are some criteria required that people behave themselves and look after. So, you know, the owners of the property do have a lot to play in this particular situation, but certainly there's a lot of people out there who do want to weigh in on this. And I think we're going to have to take pretty well the whole summer and into the fall, as indicated by the document, to actually get a consensus on maybe some potential areas of making it right. Thanks.
Sorry, Councillor Jameson.
took a few things from the report, which I really appreciated seeing, because a lot of the aspects, and I know this with a short-term rental of whatever platform they use on the road I'm on, and I'm also on a private road. So there's some things in common. And so I really appreciate this approach, Your Worship, because the size of market is going to be a huge factor. And the planning director pointed out that other jurisdictions with multiple bylaw enforcement officers, infrastructure in place to do these things. For us, we would have to build in order to address this if we went at something as a standalone approach. So the size of market is critical here, because even if it's 500, that's basically 1% of the dwellings in this municipality, and building bylaws for a percentage just doesn't seem practical, and also be very expensive. So I appreciate seeing that there is an emphasis in the report on education and looking at existing bylaws, because complaints tend to come in, and I see them in a couple of the places in the Bay as well as on my own road, about behaviors which are really hard to regulate, as we know. But in terms of our bylaws around how fires, campfires or whatever you want to call them, and traffic and noise, these things can be managed under the existing system that we have. Maybe they have to be made more sophisticated. So I appreciate that we're going to consult before we go down the STR path, because I know, and this is anecdotal, I have family in the Blue Mountain area, and I have family in Peck. And now I'm hearing these stories because I've asked that there is a proliferation of these kinds of short-term rentals that actually can exceed the actual basic population in those areas for certain months of the year. And the municipalities have tried to respond, but it is being met by residents with very mixed success. So I would like to see something that works and that just doesn't become a sinkhole that involves people suing each other and all the things that come along. I would like to see what the planning department will recommend with respect to existing bylaws. And I would like to see education move forward. I'm also a big fan of the administrative monetary policy that we will ultimately see in a limited basis that could actually, from how it's explained to me, be expanded to include other things. In other words, we ticket as opposed to write lawyers' letters, and we have something that's functional and practical to address a problem that is relatively small, although if you're in the middle of it, it's very big. So I really appreciate this report, and I look forward to a robust public consultation. Thank you.
Sorry, I shut mine off. Any further comments or questions? Go ahead, Councillor Wilkie.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I very much like Councillor Jameson's approach about ticketing, but just one area of prudence that I noticed in your report, you showed an area, and my memory, just short-term memory doesn't give me the exact name of it anymore, but municipality, perhaps not too much larger than ours, they brought in a very comprehensive program, gained $360,000 in revenue, but had $460,000 in expenditures to make this work. So there's a real problem here for smaller, relatively smaller municipality. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, through your worship. If I may just run through, we did receive one item of public correspondence that was received before this evening, and there are a number of questions that were identified. If you would like me to run through those,
Sure,
I can do
go
so. The first question was respect to, given the timeline for public consultation, has the township considered a grandfathering date for any potential changes to the zoning bylaw or operational plan? A use can't be grandfathered until there's a zoning provision to regulate it. So at this time, there's no way to establish a grandfathering date until there's a policy framework in effect. The second piece of that question has the township council considered a moratorium on new short-term rentals Again, just to respond to that, I would indicate that you can't pass an interim control bylaw to regulate a use that doesn't have an existing framework that needs to be addressed. So that's not something that could be done in this case. Secondly, third, has the township considered a clause pertaining to requiring short-term rentals to front a public road? Again, this is something that would come up through the review and consultation process. Many of the municipalities that we did look at have a variety of clauses, but a lot of them addressed short-term rentals on existing lots of record and existing operations and didn't specifically get into the regulations around the private roads. So that's something that will be part of our review and come back in terms of recommendations. The next question was asking council to please discuss their position on the information. So again, that's not a question, but it's a request. And then finally, the last question that was received was requiring a minimum separation distance from neighboring properties or densities. And again, that's an approach that we have seen in a couple of the municipalities. I think Blue Mountain as well as Prince Edward County use density and concentrations. There was another township, I believe I referenced in the report, Ramara, that also has a density provision or a separation distance. So that again would be something that can be looked at. In my opinion, a separation distance is somewhat arbitrary and subjective. So we'd have to look at it in more detail, but I don't have an answer for that because we need to complete our review.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions from council members? Go ahead, Councillor Foti, and then Councillor Oki.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a comment. I think our lifestyles under COVID the last 2 years, and with all the changes that came with that, namely people realizing we can work from home or work remotely, I think we're going to see a lot of expansion in this field. I know I've talked to people that have bought or are currently buying what would deem to be expensive properties, and they have full intent to pay off some of that debt by Airbnb the properties. So I can see this whole program snowballing significantly.
Councillor Oki.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I've engaged with a number of residents on this, and it's always something that's affected their quality of life and their enjoyment of their property. And it's going to be very hard to regulate something that supports that. As the planner mentioned, some of it would have to be extremely arbitrary. But on the other hand, some of the things I've heard, I really feel sympathy for the residents. One of the trends we're in now is that the generation that owns a lot of these properties will ultimately sell them. And the younger generation coming along probably can't afford them. So we may see more and more of these properties fall into the hands of people who actually don't intend to live in them, even part-time, and want them for rental properties. So there is certainly scope for some kind of regulation, but it needs a lot of study. Thank you.
I guess I have a differing opinion because the two comments that have been made by Councillor Foti, maybe not a differing opinion, but a differing perspective, because I believe a lot of people who are selling properties in the urban centers are actually moving out here and living in them full time. Not to say that they wouldn't necessarily go away for a month abroad and think about Airbnb-ing it to offset their month abroad or something to that effect. One of the comments made by Councillor Jameson in regards to education sort of tweaked something for me, because there are people in this township who live here year round that don't know we have a burning bylaw, you know, and I say that tongue in cheek, not because they're being, you know, obstinate. They just aren't aware and they burn whatever and don't think anything of it until maybe perhaps they're called out on it. So same goes for a noise bylaw. If you asked 80% of the people in this township, I doubt they would be able to tell you that we have a noise bylaw. That means that you can't have loud music after 11 p.m. So the other thing that, you know, I take Councillor Gorell's comment about, you know, making sure that we get all aspects of the consultation as best as we can, because typically the people who are against this are coming out more so enforce than people who are using this as a method to maintain their property. And growing up here, I know there's tons of families on Charleston Lake, even still to this day, who hold family held cottages that rent them out for 3 or 4 weeks out of the summer, and it pays the taxes, it pays the upkeep, small contributions towards maintenance and upkeep and those sorts of things. So, it isn't a one size fits all approach by any stretch of the imagination. The other thing that needs to be clearly defined is the cost associated with enforcement of this, because as I'm not sure who made the comment about the 500 properties, I guess it was you, Councillor Jameson, that the cost would be borne by all of the municipality, because there's no way that we would have potential, in my estimation, there wouldn't be enough revenue from quote unquote short-term rentals, Airbnbs, to offset the true costs associated with managing this, potentially based on some of the cases that we've heard from other jurisdictions. So it's trying to find that equal balance between education, maintenance, and upkeep of, a database, and what enforcement looks like, with having one bylaw enforcement officer currently employed by the municipality, and not to mention our volunteer firefighters who might have to respond to an after hours out of control grass fire, or maybe not even that, just somebody calling in, there's no burn permit type of thing. All of that ends up being added to the bottom line. So, okay, I don't see any other hands up from council, but I do have a hand up from the gallery. I will recognize Aaron Bradford. And can you ask your question, Ms. Bradford?
Yeah, thanks so much. I apologize. I'm suffering from a bit of laryngitis, so I hope everyone can hear me clearly. Thank you, through Madam Mayor, to your staff and council for your time and consideration on this issue. You recall that we met about this time last year to discuss issues we were having on our lane, and I see that the planner has asked some pre-submitted questions on my behalf. If I may, on behalf of my delegation, I heard Councillor Gorell speak to reading the backup, and I've read it myself, of whether this is commercial or not. And I'm also hearing councillors say it's quite arbitrary. At the same time, I hear Councillor Fody say it is defined in the operating plan as 28 days or less. So I guess just a comment that it's not arbitrary and can be clearly defined and measurable in that manner. Also, with respect to distance between properties and proximity, again, hearing that that's difficult and arbitrary, it's very clear to define in common units of measure, whether it's, feet or meters or what have you. The one part of the question with respect to private roads, which is very important for us, the planner didn't include the connection to the next agenda item, which staff is bringing forward a report 051022 with respect to policy standards for private roads, with respect to emergency vehicle access. And that was really the point and the connection I wanted to make, is that we have private roads that don't meet that standard, that are entertaining these Airbnbs, and it does create increased risk and traffic. And then finally, just to maybe pull in Olkey's comment, and appreciate that Olkey and Jameson and the planner and the CAO visited last year. It's by far impacting quality of life in our neighborhoods, where we have our children playing, where we're enjoying our retirement communities. We appreciate this is a very cumbersome and complex process, but the timeline is a challenge for us in particular, because as this is going on, we've had another property come on our 9 property in total private lane of half a kilometer. So I'm just expressing on behalf of our delegation those comments to the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bradford. Any further comments to be made by any of the attendees? I don't see any hands going up, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the item at hand, please signify. All those opposed? That's carried. So we look forward to the consultation and receiving comments from all taxpayers, both owners and otherwise, of short-term rentals, so that we can make an informed decision. I'm going to call a recess for 5-10 minutes, just so that everybody, we've been going since 6 o'clock, so I apologize to the gallery. If we can be back here, actually make it 7:45, we'll give it a 5-minute, and then we'll reconvene. Thank you. Okay, we were back at 7:46, everybody. If we can ask you to take your seats. And do we have Deputy Mayor Lackey? Okay, he's just in behind his camera. He is. Okay, so we will get the show on the road. I do know we have a fairly lengthy agenda still yet. So we will move on to item number 5.3, which is the operations report SR-051-22, updated private road grant policy and standard. Moved by Councillor Foti, seconded by Councillor Jameson. The committee of the whole, that the committee of whole recommends that council grant 3 readings and final passage to bylaw number 22-028, being a bylaw to update the private road grant policy, and rescind bylaw 15-046, being the bylaw that originally established the private road grant policy. So I guess maybe we'll start this off by having the director give a very quick synopsis of the differences between the previous policy and this policy, just snippet. And then we'll go and we'll ask the questions at that point.
Thank you. So the previous private lane policy was a very good policy for financial accounting and accountability. The requirement for the bank statements, the minutes, balanced budgets, all of those types of things, you know, we made sure that our money was going somewhere where it was going to be used by a lane association rather than a personal individual on the policy. When I came into this position, I started asking people, I started following this policy and asking people for these records. And it was like a new process that I'd never had to do this in the past. I wasn't asked to do this and I always got the money. So I got everybody in line with that process now. But what I found was lacking was what the money was being used for. We had some applications where a donation for a funeral and stamps and those types of things, which it doesn't contribute to the lane, to bringing it to a standard. We did not have a standard attached to this. There was not a municipal standard for the private lanes. So the new policy introduces a standard for the private lanes in terms of, you know, the clear zone for trees and a platform that you would expect to be able to drive emergency vehicles on, turnarounds for the emergency vehicles and for the general public, you know, drainage, culverts, all those types of things. And then also a mechanism for financial support from the municipality to be able to achieve these standards. Putting gravel on a road is expensive, but having to create that platform by breaking rock and cutting down trees and all those types of things in advance is even more expensive. So an example, we have several lanes. The longest one that we had that had submitted last year was 6.4 kilometers, and they had received $2,700. They had been proactive and installed about $17,000 worth of gravel and calcium on the road. So a $17,000 investment with a $2,700 return from the township. The smallest one was 0.2 kilometers, and they had put gravel down as well. They had spent a couple $1,000 and they received $84 from us for that. So we will receive less applications, but I think that the objective is to be able to get our emergency vehicles in there and to have a standard for all these private lanes that is consistent from one to the other. We do have some private lanes currently where we've had some issues with emergency access. Narrows Lane with the trees. Another one was off Lower Oakleaf Road where the residents were brushing the trees when they found out that they would be at fault for any damage to the emergency vehicles. They were brushing the trees before the emergency vehicles could come back out. Gan Lake Road has several grades, which is something that's included in this as well, that our emergency vehicles just can't make it up those grades to get to those residences. So that's the purpose of this upgrade to the private lane grant policy.
Thank you very much for the synopsis. Go ahead, Councillor Garreau.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, Mr. Director. I see that when I saw the last chart of how many private roads there were quite a number. There were well over 10, maybe 20.
For last year?
Yeah. And the reason I'm bringing it up, I'll just keep talking here. The reason I bring it up is we're looking at 5,000 maximum per application. And if we're thinking about putting $50,000, that would be 10 applications. Now, I appreciate that those folks, to get that money, it's a $10,000 project, correct? Minimum,
That is
because
correct.
they're going to get 50%. So what would happen if we got 20 people all of a sudden thinking, hey, we're going to do some within the boundaries, within the rules of a capital improvement?
Okay,
How are we going to handle that?
thank
Are we
you.
going to sort of prorate everybody down a little bit?
Through your worship. So it is 50% funding is what is being proposed.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just finding it here while we're talking. I did have it, and now I do not. It is 50% funding. There is a process for evaluation. So before they go out and they spend their money, we set up a meeting where we go out, we meet on site, we have a look at what's being proposed, and then we have an evaluation process proposed for this so that we're comparing apples to apples. So one would be compliance with all those financial articles that were pre-existing in the old policy. It'd be the significance of the proposed improvements would be the second one. Number of residents impacted by the proposed improvement, the ability to support and improve access for emergency vehicles, adherence to the private road standard cross-section specifications, and then the availability of funding.
So it really is a bit of a competition for that money, which as long as, I just want to be clear,
Yes,
it is, because there is a limited pot.
that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing that I'll just make note of before I recognize Councillor Jameson is that many of these lanes, these private lanes, when originally were established, were seasonal residents only. So when being questioned about why we would, be putting in turnarounds and those sorts of things, that could be the difference between getting a fire truck there in time or not. Because if they miss your lane because your 911 number is not visible for whatever reason or what have you, they need to be able to turn around, and they don't turn around on a dime. So trying to incent taxpayers who live on these private lanes to do the type of work that would be helpful in the event of an emergency, whether it be a heart attack, fire, or otherwise, that we can be there in as fast manner as possible. Go ahead.
One more thing, there were 23 applications last year. And the other thing with the turnarounds, the longest lane that submitted last year was 6.4 kilometers. By requiring additional turnarounds rather than just at the end of the road, that saves our emergency vehicles from having to drive 6.4 kilometers before they can turn around.
Go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
I really have two questions. The and it just occurred to me, and I should have asked in advance, should I be declaring an interest, or because this is not a money
This isn't
bill?
about money at this point. It's about setting policy.
Okay. So my questions, Your Worship, and just to comment on the business of getting flowers for funerals or stamps or whatever. A lot of the road associations become community groups in their own way, and we all understand that. And I'm on a private road, obviously, but I have a couple of questions. This is the expectation that people will go for a grant and maintain a standard that allows emergency vehicles to use that's one of the major things that we're trying to accomplish here. And I get that, but there are two questions here. Well, the most important one is, what if they look at this and say, forget it. I'm not going to apply. I'm just going to leave the road. The issue for those of us in the private road is we expect you to come anyway. And the nature of the way our emergency services people respond is they go. And we all know that. Bless them. Thank goodness they go. But if we're going to have a situation where we have on private roads, in the dead of winter, our road was virtually unpassable because with the rock and roll of this winter, you had craters, and my car is still in the shop from going into one. So that would require you to, and this is my second question, that would require you to do an assessment through the year and through the seasonal side, would it not? The plan or the operations to do an assessment on a regular basis through the seasons to ensure that that standard was being maintained seasonally so that our equipment can get in to get people. And so the question is, if they choose not, how do we respond legally, I guess is the word? And will you be in a position to assess on a regular basis seasonally? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, through your worship. So private lanes are private property. So if you don't want to maintain the lane to a standard, then you wouldn't be accepted for the grant application. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. In terms of the investigation afterwards, it's the same thing. It's a private lane. There are 2 inspections that are required as part of the policy that's being proposed. There's one before the work that's being completed for the suggested work, and there's one being completed after the work has been completed, and no money exchanged hands until after that second inspection is completed to make sure that it's brought up to a standard.
But the clarity I think that you're looking for is in regards to winter maintenance. And if it wasn't winter maintained, what is our responsibility as a municipality to go and respond? And I think the fire chief could probably answer that. We respond regardless, but it's no different than someone who has a long laneway. And there was one in particular instance that comes to mind where they had difficulty just getting up a hill because somebody hadn't sanded and kept their driveway up. And it's not that they didn't respond, but it took them longer to get to the property because the property owner hadn't maintained the driveway such that a fire truck could get up. So we don't go inspect everybody's driveways.
So an example from this winter would be Gan Lake Road, where the emergency services couldn't get down Gan Lake Road, and the fire services called our department to come in, but we were unable to get our plow down that road because it was substandard for the standard that we're proposing. So in a situation in the wintertime where fire can't get down there without some sort of winter maintenance, they would call upon us to come and provide that winter maintenance to get them in.
Okay, just to, and I know you're bringing up Gan Lake Lane, and I know they're one of the most active and engaged lane associations of the bunch up my way. So I appreciate that they will understand what you're saying and probably respond positively accordingly. I'm not sure my own road association understands that if your entire road is a moon crater from December 31 to March 15, that if the truck just looks at it and says, we're not going down, the issue for you is going to be education, I guess, is the issue for our planning. Our operations is going to be education, because it's been pretty difficult for me to help a couple of people on my road understand we can't carry on like this. And a lot of us are not resident in the winter, and we don't care. We're in Texas, you know. So I know it's going to be a challenge, but we're all taxpayers on these private roads, and we have an expectation that even I have the expectation the ambulance is going to come for me. So I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for the effort.
Any further comments or questions? Go ahead, Councillor, maybe, and then Councillor Grubb.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to the director. So on the roads, has there been anybody actually requesting that the township take over any of these private roads or bring them up to standards so that we can take them over? Has that ever arisen?
I have not received any requests for bringing the road to a public standard or making it a public road. Not since I've been here.
Not that you need more roads to plow, by the way, but.
Yep. Oh, sorry. I actually recognize Councillor.
Oh, sorry.
My apologies.
Thank you, through your worship. I just want to make a comment from Mr. Councillor Jameson that perhaps his road association should implement developmental charges.
If they were only enforceable. Go ahead.
I'd have to move.
Yeah.
To your point there, we did raise the prospect of turning over a good portion of our road, but the cost of bringing it up, in effect, it's a bunch of gravel put on a farmer's field, and it doesn't have anything remotely resembling the base that would be required legally. And it was an astronomical amount of money. And it's bad enough getting the money out of us every year just to throw a little gravel around. So we're not going to see a lot of applications to switch. It's cheaper and easier for us to support each other on these roads with a little bit of nurturing from our operations people than it would ever be for us to take over these roads. Thank you.
And I'm glad that that point was brought up, mainly because there was a comment made in the public that perhaps, the townships, if they expect these to be at certain standards, that we should just take over all the roads. The interesting piece is that this policy was not meant for us to say that you need a 33-foot wide, crowned in the middle, drainage on both sides. Because if that was the case, then, there'd be a lot of people coming forward. What it is trying to do is that when you drive through some of these cattle paths, which is what they were originally, I think of going to my aunt's cottage back at Charleston Lake as a kid, and what the road was then versus what the road is now. It's night and day, and they have an active lane association as well. But when you have two trees that have been there for 100 years on either side of the road, and you can't get a plow through it, or a sander, whatever it might be, in the event of an emergency situation where we need to go and do some spot sanding to get a truck up a road or through, these are things that we have to take into account. The other thing that needs to be discussed, though, is that when an individual purchases a home on a private road, you are buying a home on a private road. You are essentially sharing a driveway with whether it's 6, 10, 102, however many individuals. The difficulty is living on a private lane on myself now, is that not all individuals pay their road dues. And there is no mechanism by which the province or the township can assist us in helping enforce that, to ensure that things are a certain standard. So it's great when everybody's holding hands and singing Kumbaya and loving each other. But when some people are like, well, I don't need to pay that. But a lot of times, I think it's back to another piece of education where people don't really realize when they buy these homes on these private roads or private lanes, that they have an obligation to maintain their driveway, whether they're the first house on the lane or the last house on the lane, and mainly for the greater good of their neighbors. So if you're trying to be neighborly this is what you need to do, because it wouldn't matter if the ambulance needs to get to you at the first house or the last house. Everybody deserves to have a fair shot at it. That's for sure. And the one thing that I've got educated as another aside is that ambulances are rear wheel drive dualies. So if you don't know what that means, basically in snow, they are difficult to drive, especially in the event that there's any ice or thick snow. They can get stuck. And that's not to disparage our EMS. I know they work hard and lots of them are great drivers, but the vehicle itself is not necessarily the most, it's certainly not a Humvee, let's put it that way, where they can go anywhere at any time. Well, I'm sure with the right driver, they can have a better shot at it. But these are the sorts of things that we're trying to, after many conversations with the director, that we're trying to instill. It's not trying to make it more difficult or onerous for private lane associations or private lane property owners, but to actually assist them in making things better. So the motion still remains on the floor. I don't see any other hands up. Sorry, I apologize, Deputy Mayor Lackey. I apologize if I've missed you there. Just need to unmute yourself there.
There we go. Just to play the devil's advocate, you know what? If you want to live on a private lane, that's your prerogative. I don't expect that because you decided to live there, that someone else should look after your road or your lane or whatever. You know what? Go live on a county road or go live on a different road. As you say, and I agree with you, all your comments, most of these were cottages, seasonal. And now they've made them into homes. And now they expect that we should look after the roads. Well, the last time I checked, you had to bring your road up to MTO standard before we could take them over. So if that's what they want to do, then let them.
Thank you for your comment, Deputy Mayor. Any further comments or questions? I don't see. Oh, sorry, Councillor Foti, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, more of an afterthought. I want to say to the director, I like this policy. I like the fact that you're giving road associations the ability and the financial help to get them to where they belong. Because the last thing we want, it's one thing to provide funding to get roads up to par. It's a lot cheaper than repairing the fire truck that rolls on its side.
Yeah, especially when they come to the ticket tune of $500,000, the last one, and I know that the next one is closer to the 700,000. So it's a very good point, Councillor Foti. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? And we're carried. Next on the docket is 5.4 Operations Support SR-045-22 Ivy Lee Wharf Design. And the motion comes forward from Councillor Gorell, seconded by Councillor Olkey, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that council authorize staff to proceed with the revised option E replacement and reconfiguration regarding the redesign of the Ivy Lee Wharf. Discussion on this motion. Go ahead, Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Director. The reconfiguration is very close to when we visited the site with all council and fire officials. It does look very close to where we or what we had discussed that day. There are a few questions that I have, which isn't a surprise. I know. So number one, there is a building presently there with electrical service. On this diagram, it doesn't indicate where the electric service is going to go or how it's going to be housed. Because again, there are lights and probably power that's going to be at the dock. Secondly, the area where the building is presently, when I walked on it, it felt like it was a hollow, maybe wooden pier type dock. In the archival diagrams, it showed that it was a crib style, but it still doesn't feel that way. And the building and that piece of the dock that is shown in the new design, is it going to be built in the structure or manner of the main dock? The rampway itself seems to be adequately long enough, but is it long enough for a very large vessel since it's a wider rampway? And we do have, I think it was 10 meters at the edge of the dock, potentially. So does it need to be longer is basically my question there. The actual structure of the dock itself, and I know that I weighed in on this very heavily, and I believe if I go to my notes, I haven't even gone to my notes yet, that I think number B on the report was more of a steel piling drilled into the rock and then concrete filled with a concrete deck on it, that which, isn't really the way that it should be. But having said that, that steel piling still drilled into the into the bedrock, because I know they talk about sheet piling and the sediment isn't deep enough to hold the sheet piling. And at our meeting, we did discuss this also, that those drilled caissons basically drilled into the bedrock at even 4 feet deep, filled with concrete, and then the sheet piling, instead of horizontal, goes vertical to retain all the material. And the major reason that I have said this is that the wood cribbing that is in the water is 66 years old. And yeah, it's done okay, but it's also lost some of its material within the crib, which has also made the surface deflect, crack, and break, and as well as the pounds per square inch or foot in this case, being what requiring about 250 opposed to the 200 that it is presently in some areas. So we need to, in my mind, take away all the wood. There shouldn't be any wood cribbing in there because it's going to deteriorate at a faster rate than the steel. The steel deck that they talked about has a 75-year lifespan, and typically at a 75 from an engineer, you can double it almost. It's just how things are. And the wood cribbing, they basically only give it like a 50-year. So we're gaining another 25 years by an engineer's report.
Brian,
Yep.
can I ask you to stop there? Because I know that he's writing voraciously, but are you
Keep
okay?
going. I'm ready
I
for
just wasn't sure if you wanted to
yeah.
answer some of these questions.
you. I was
before-
ready for you tonight.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead.
Sorry.
That's okay.
In saying that, excuse me, encapsulation of the wharf itself, I think is very crucial. It also showed that on the west side, wood cribbing here, right adjacent to the rampway. And again, I'm opposed to wood cribbing at all. It just doesn't last long enough. Because we do need a breakwater there for the boater. So why not make that a floating dock? It's still going to be an adequate breakwater anchored properly to the bottom of the waterway, and it will suffice and make a good landing spot because of the westerly winds coming into this dockway. I think it's a much better way of handling that than our floating docks that are actually out there. Everything's going to be brand new, I take it. Nothing of the old, other than the infill of the actual dock, is going to be reused, if I remember correctly by what I read. Let me just check my notes here, see if I got everything. Again, a lot of the top surface amenities can be changed anytime. Any building without a good foundation will never stand the test of time. And that's why I'm so adamant about this type of construction. We're going to spend $2.5 million on this. With interest, it works well over the 4 million. So if we're going to do it, let's do it right. I see this all the time, unfortunately, way too often. And sometimes I get my way, not always. And I don't know where this one's going to go either, but I have my voice. I'm going to use it. And I want to express my thoughts on that. Thank you.
Go ahead, Director.
That's it? Only 7 questions for me? You're taking it easy on me tonight. I get it. Okay. Building electrical, that will be part of the detailed design once we open everything up. It's going to be all brand new, all the way down to the dock. We have looked at electrical out to the floating docks as well. We talked about having a gate system in place, and lights and stuff at the end of the docks and those types of things. So that will be addressed as part of the detailed design. The area where the building is right now is hollow. The plan is to make the entire structure consistent throughout. So there won't be any areas where it's different. They need it actually for the support of the wharf itself, especially with us widening the boat ramp. That takes away from the overall structure, which they require for ice shifting and all those different types of things. So that will be a complete fill-in structure. The ramp length for the design. So what you see here is theoretical. There are no anticipated lengths. There's guidelines that they have to follow, slopes that they have to follow. So it will give and take depending on what the height of the final wharf elevation is once it's all completed. And that will be determined by the flood elevations that we received in 17 and 18. That's all part of the detailed design as well. And then once we achieve that slope, they'll know exactly where the toe of the ramp is at that point. I'm going to skip over this one for a second, the structure and the wood cribbing. So the floating docks, our intent is to use the existing floating docks for this. So I met with a contractor out on site. They feel that the floats are still in good shape. They're about halfway through their life cycle, but the surface of the docks are terrible. They're nail pops and all those types of things. So the plan is to refurbish those and bring them to a condition that we can still use the extended life out of them, but not get rid of those quite yet because they're still in decent shape. The top surface amenities, we're talking about bollards and steel rail. Yep. Yeah, so I've been working with the engineers on that in terms of what we're looking for. I think when we met on site, we talked about limiting access out to the end of the wharf for contractors where we can control that a little better. We will have cameras on site, so we're meeting with security companies right now to update our security contracts so that we can extend putting cameras out there and all those types of things. So all of that stuff is being considered right now. So the wood cribbing by the ramp, I know that has been shown on the edge as a bit of a buffer between the existing property owner and ourselves. I don't know that that's exactly where we need it to be yet. We've talked about having some sort of ramp along that side. I'm not sure if that's possible yet, but once we get into the detailed design, we'll have a better sense of what we can achieve there. To me, we should have some sort of access along that side or some way to get to your boat other than having to use the main barrier. I'm not sure if that's possible yet. They're going to let me know that as we get moving along. So the structure of the dock, I understand with the piers or the piles, and I did put this out to them. The biggest thing for me is the balance of the cost versus the life expectancy. This is one project of several that are coming down the pipeline, and my concern is that we could spend all of our money in this one location. I think it was another $1 million for putting in the piles. I think initially, but they're saying that it's going to require additional structure underneath the ramp in order to be able to support the construction activities. So we have to look at those types of things as well. I'm concerned of spending, for they say 50 years for the cribs as well. We could probably get away with another 25, 30 years right now with the existing cribs that are in place. They had concerns with trying to say 50 years, but I think that they were getting at that there's still additional life expectancy. So it's that balance of whether the life expectancy of the wood cribs is worth it, the value to life benefit. I did talk to them. They did have some concerns with that, but it's something we can certainly consider as part of the long-term design on this. We're certainly not at the end of design for this project. I think I've answered all of your questions.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I do have a follow-up. Now, the cribbing that's there will all be removed, number one, before they ever start anymore if we go that way. Correct. So it'll be all new material. Now, that type of material, what will it be? Is it going to be wooden creosote or some other product on the wood? And again, environmentally safe, because that's another big factor. And I know I also commented on possibly concrete cribbing, whether there's big concrete blocks we can put down there instead of wood cribbing, which then does have a longer lifespan also, and whether that configuration can be, or whether it's a cost savings at all.
And I did, sorry, through your worship, I did put that through to the engineers as well. And they felt that the life cycle cost benefit was better with the wood. In terms of wood, I'm not sure what the actual material is. What I do know is that the wood will not rot if it doesn't see oxygen. So that's like the wood should last as long as it's not exposed to the elements.
Just as there's another thought there. Sorry. What was it?
What was it?
It's my gray moment.
There was so many questions there, Brian.
Oh, I know. I do, unfortunately. Anyways, I don't remember what I was going to mention at that very minute, but
I'll recognize Councillor Fody, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. I'm going to bring up a different subject. When I'm looking at this presentation, somewhere along the line, we merged the property purchase for parking that was offered to us, and we took that up and purchased it. And we've conjoined the Ivy Lee dock with the parking on the north side of Ivy Lee. My assumption would be that would be for ease of borrowing money by joining the two. I have two problems with that. Number one, it artificially inflates the Ivy Lee dock reconstruction cost. And maybe just as importantly, to the gentleman who offered the property to the township in the first place, it kind of washes out in the bigger scheme of dollars the value of his offer. I would like to separate these two. I'm not so sure we need to borrow money to pay for the property across the road, but I really would like this up for discussion. I'm not the end all be all here on this table, of course, but I would like that option to be discussed.
Okay. Well, that would be up to council to have that discussion. So we'll get to that point. Is there any other questions in regards to the technicality of the report? Or did you want to add something, Director?
So I don't think that we were looking to borrow any money until the project was complete. If I say that correctly. We have not applied for any funding at this point, or applying any loans or anything like that to this project. So that would be the time when that consideration would be taken.
Okay, Brian, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you again. Again, passing this dollar amount tonight without a real concise construction method, our prices could change quite a bit here if we vary this much. So I don't know I don't think I have the appetite to actually pass it without some sort of more formal design and costing.
Through your worships, this is just the start of the project. I'm just looking for direction to proceed with a layout. We're going to go through the entire detailed design process with this, with full high level and detailed costing on this. This is just the tip of the iceberg right now, similar to the fire hall when I came with what we were looking for scope in terms of how the size of rooms and all those types of things. That was just coming to you guys and saying, what direction would you like us to go in? What would you like to see here? And that's all that this is. I'm taking into consideration. So this is just really high level, like an architect's design. Now they'll get into, what the depth of the slab is, how many piers we have to put in place and all those types of things in order to get that full costing. And then we'll come back again with the design, and they'll have the construction cost estimates and a tender package for us. And we'll put a tender out. And at that point, that's when we'll know exactly what the costs are.
Okay, thank you.
And also just to reiterate that point, the estimates that were in the report in regards to financing would be considering if we had to finance 100% of the project. The other thing being is that it's up to us as council to finance some of it, all of it, or none of it. So the only reason that it's written in there is to give context to the council that should we move ahead with going forward with design, should we wish to finance the whole of the amount, then this is based on today's rates and terms. These are the estimates that we've been given. So by no means, by approving this as it sits, to move ahead with getting the detailed direction and design, is that we're borrowing this money. That is not the intent of this motion. Okay. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion at hand, please signify. All those opposed? And we're carried. Okay, next on the agenda is 5.5 Community and Business Services Report SR-066 22 National Youth Week Proclamation, moved by Councillor Olkey, seconded by Councillor Gorell, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council declare May 1st to May 7th as Youth Week in Leeds and the Thousand Islands by way of a proclamation in the form attached to the Community and Business Services Report SR-066 22. Tongue tied tonight. It is a proclamation. So are there any comments or questions in regards to this motion that is at hand? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? And we're carried. It is officially Youth Week in Leeds and the Thousand Islands. Thank you very much for the report, Katie. Okay, next on the agenda is Administrative Report SR-063 22 update to Human Resource Policy Manual disconnect from work. Motion is put forward by Councillor Olkey and seconded by Councillor Gorell. The Committee of the Whole recommends that Council grant 3 readings and final passage to bylaw -22-029 being a bylaw to further amend bylaw number 6-034 Personnel Policy Manual as amended to include HR-48 right to disconnect. Any discussion on this? Go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
2 things. One, I was a bit confused, and maybe I'm just reading it wrong, that this is required, but the province hasn't given us any direction about how to go about it. Am I reading that right? That while we should do this, the upper tier government is not giving us any direction? That sentence confused me.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Worship, and through you. That's exactly what it is. The Employment Standards Act the amendments came in December 2nd, and they added this section that we need to have a right to a disconnect from work policy. It applies to employers that have more than 25 or more employers or employees. It has to be in place by January 2nd, and that's it. Stay tuned. On its website, the provincial government really didn't put in very much in terms of what needs to be covered in the policy. There's been lots of legal discussions from the law firms as to, we'll help you develop this policy, not knowing exactly what you need to have in it. The Employment Standards Act basically just gives a definition of disconnecting from work, meaning you're unplugged from work communications or tasks when you're not supposed to be working. So outside your regular hours, breaks, lunch times, that sort of thing. So with the help of Director Tyndall, we found some examples from other townships, and it looked like they were taking this similar approach, both the townships, and we sort of followed along with what we saw. And so we've got a written policy that council's considering, and it ticks the requirements of the Employment Standards Act. Perhaps the provincial government will come out with some regulations to further flesh out the requirements, in which case we will make sure that we come back to council to amend the policy as needed to make sure that we comply with the regulations.
Go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
So my second question, and I appreciate that background, and I certainly understand the point of it and why it should be there, Your Worship. But my second question is, we get these books as the governors here. We get these books on a Wednesday or a Thursday, and I try to climb into them in the evenings as soon as I get them and whatever, and then exchange emails with Councillor Gorell and stuff. And I tend to form questions and I ask them as I get them, or I read something. And I have no expectation, because of the businesses I was in, we could work 24/7 and never get anything done. I mean, it's just the nature of communication. But I have no expectation if I send, 7 o'clock at night, I send an email off to one of the directors that, one, they're reading it. And I sure as hell hope they aren't, excuse my language. And two, I guess it would be helpful for us to have direction about how we need to communicate these things because of the nature of our meetings falling on Monday nights and the weekends and everything else is when I do most of the reading, as we all do, have to do it when we're not engaged in other things. So my question is there a way that we can ensure that we are respecting the direction of this policy? Thank you.
Thank you. It's for you. That's a good question. In the policy, there is a statement acknowledging that employees, when they're not at work, need to unplug and not respond to emails. But there's also a portion of the policy that says, for those of us who like to send emails, think twice. Is it something that has to go at 9 o'clock at night, on a weekend, what have you? And, you know, if it's an urgent matter, if there's an operational need for urgency, of course. But if it's something that can wait, that's fine. If it's sent, it should be sent without the expectation that you're going to get a reply. And it's sad that we have to put this in a policy. And I know that the provincial government wasn't thinking of us as a township when they drafted this regulation to the Employment Standards Act, but sadly, there are places of work out there. There are employers who expect their employees to be at their beck and call 24/7. And the toll it takes on employees' mental wellness and their productivity and all that, it's a concern. So the province was taking some action on this. So I don't think it's a problem for us as a township. I don't think any of the supervisory staff treat their staff, their reporting staff in that manner. I am guilty of sending emails at weird hours, but it's always with the expectation that it's not I'm wanting somebody to reply to me at 3 a.m. because I happen to be up and I'm thinking of something. So I think it's a respect thing. And in the case of operational callouts for snow clearing in the winter, or if there's an emergency that needs to be done, taken care of right away, we'll work with the operations crews on what's a suitable format to getting in touch with them if we're not expecting them to read their emails. Maybe if it's after hours that we need to have the crews out, we can phone them or something like that, or work out a code where it's, you know, urgent or something. But that will work out at a staff level.
You're going to beat this one, Councillor Jameson.
And I get all this, and I completely agree with this, Your Worship. And I know I was running an organization when the recession of 2008-9 hit, and everybody was on the emails 24 hours a day in all the companies that I work with, because they all thought they were going to lose their jobs. So they wanted to show how engaged they were at 3 a.m. So I saw the fallout from that, and it was pretty ugly, and everybody lost their jobs anyway, because the industry collapsed. So I understand the mental health issues and all the other things. I'm just saying, from the point of view of a counselor, sometimes I can't get to the book until 7 o'clock at night. And I tend to want to get the questions off my mind in the email and they know who they are, who the poor folks that get them. But I want to be sure that they don't have an expectation, or they don't think my expectation is I'm expecting a response before Monday morning if I send something out on Friday evening. So that's where I think we need a little guidance in the context of what you're trying to achieve here, because we represent this whole other crew. And I know that from having boards of directors. You know, you just never know when somebody's going to come at you with something in the middle of the night that is not an emergency. So I'm just saying, what's the conduct for us in this? We should have something in there too.
I'll show you how to delay send. Anyways, it's this technology thing. It's great. Okay, Counselor Gorell, go ahead, and then Counselor Baby, and please make it short. We got a few more things we got to get going to. So
Thank you, through your worship. Through COVID, we probably strayed from our employee manual in terms of where people work, how people do their work. I'm going to make that assumption because people were working from home, and I don't see that in our employee manual. I see hours written in our employee manual where people are expected to be certain places. And I do understand the progressive trend these days. So my question number one is, what is our current standard and expectation for all employees with respect to homework, office work, and so on? That'd be my first question. And number two, if we're talking this disconnect from work, I would imagine that some people working from home actually can set their time clocks a little differently. They might not feel that it's like 9 to 5. They might go 10 to whatever, 10 to 6 or something like that. But if you're in an office environment of 9 to 5 or 8 to 4 or whatever, it's pretty clear when you can disconnect from work. Bing, bang, it's 8, it's 4. So there's a lot of words on this paper, a lot of words. And I just wonder, it seems somewhat unnecessary. You're either working or you're not working, and be respectful of other people. So we have pages here of description of when you're working and when you're not. So my first question would be, what is our current standard of where we expect people to be working from and how in the employment standard book or employee book?
So the work from home, as you all are aware, was in response to COVID requirements and attempting to keep staff safe and limit the spread. And the requirement for work, whether you're working from home or here, was that staff were expected to be putting in their 7 hours a day, 35 hours a week. And as long as they were getting their assignments done and making sure that we were serving the public and there weren't any holes in that, to the best of our ability. Some staff were unable to be online all the time due to wonky internet or what have you. And there was a certain amount of grace given for that because of the circumstances. But it really is something between the staff member and their supervisor to ensure that their work assignments are getting done in a timely fashion and that the bases are being covered. I'm not entirely opposed to working from home for staff as long as they're producing what they are expected to. And we've continued on with staff working from home when they need to. I think we have to be flexible in that. It's the modern working world. And part of the thing we have to adapt to is that there's an awful lot of employers out there that are seeking ways to attract new staff. And if allowing somebody some time to work from home it eases their life or eases their stress or allows them to attend to something that's also happening during that day, I'm not going to complain about it as long as the staff are being productive. So there's a balance that we have to hit for sure. But if it, and it's not a vacation day or anything like that, they're online, they're responding to emails and all that. If their hours are going to be different because they have to attend to something during the day, they should let their supervisor know so that, hey, I'm going to be offline for a few hours because I have a tradesperson coming to my house or something. That's fine, but they need to work their 7 hours, whether it's the traditional, 9 to 4, or if it's something outside of that. My concern on this, of course, is always coverage to make sure that we have coverage as staff and we're not caught short.
So I've got Counselor Baby, then Counselor Olkey, then Counselor Jameson, and just keep your points brief if you can, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to CAO. Number one, I look after a site with 300 plus provincial employees that all went home without hardly any notice. So overnight, a lot of them work from home. I've talked to a lot of them. Most of them liked it because they were able to be flexible and they did do stuff after hours or even before their normal work hours. but also there was no expectation that they were getting answers from any of the emails. In saying that, there's also been so much FaceTime in the computer that I think we're going to see a lot more eye appointments coming up. But also with that, with the lunchtime, they put a lunch and learn on that, which delved right into that personal time, that which I think this particular topic goes to, is that get you away from the computer so that you have a break and you can concentrate on the rest of your life, because we work to live, not live to work. So there's that side of it. And then there was one more point I wanted to make too. And again, I'm way more. What was it about the lunch and learn, which is a more important thing of not disconnecting totally. And I don't expect an email to be returned to me if I send it, no matter when I send it. When I do, it's just that I happen to see it. And going back to the minutes and the agenda that we get, maybe on a Thursday night, there's a lot of material to go through in a short period of time, which has always been a pet peeve of mine anyways, because you get these massive reports and I like trying to read them thoroughly. And I did every one of them for this meeting. So again, it's a challenge to get it all done. But again, when you got to get something, you want to send it out, you have to. Thank you.
Councillor Olkey, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And having come from a 35-year career where one was expected to be ready to go 24/7, even if you're on leave, some of this stuff is a little strange to me. But it seems to me that with clear direction, training in this new environment, and reasonable expectations, I'm not sure we need legislation on it. But anyway, that's my 2 cents. And you said to keep it short, so I did.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Councillor Jameson.
I kind of pulled us into the weeds here and I apologize. At the end of the day, it's about the NRAs, the net results achieved. So we saw it tonight, a tremendous set of audited statements. I know with respect to feedback on the things we do are seeing done for us on the roads and planning and building and everything that's going on in the township. Stay out of the weeds, and it works. And these guys have really proved in the last year, an incredibly difficult situation, that they understand what the NRAs are and they're delivering. So this is a good policy. Let's get on with it. And I apologize for getting in the weeds. And I appreciate your offer to teach me about delay, because
Delayed
mine just
send.
go to the junk. I just can't figure out how to do it. So thank you.
Well, we get the YouTube video. I have to tutorialize you. So there's a motion on the floor. I apologize. And there's a motion on the floor in regards to the personnel policy manual. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, all those abstaining, and the motion is carried. Thank you. Sorry. Next on the motion, on the agenda, my apologies. Next motion is moved by Councillor Olkey, seconded by Councillor Grow, that the committee of the whole recommends that council grant 3 readings and final passage to bylaw number 22-030, being a bylaw to regulate municipal election signs in the township of Leeds and the Thousand Islands. Discussion on this motion. Go ahead, Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. I'm kind of left knowing, where can I put a sign? It almost sounds like I can't put it anywhere. So I'm a little bit, I don't know. And personally, I like to have a sign up. So I'm not really sure, because it talks about an island, and there's one just outside of Gananoque to the east, which is notorious for signs, which is a great spot because it's a parkway and number 2 highway. Then the roadway where I typically put them, I don't think is a problem, but it doesn't sound like I can really walk away from this and know 100% where I can put a sign.
Okay, I'll maybe let the clerk answer that. As far as locations of actual signs, can you speak to the specifics of that or lack thereof, if in the event that Councillor May's point is?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you, of course. So, bringing this bylaw forward, doing my due diligence, going through what other municipalities have put forward in the past. This is just a draft bylaw, overseeing what we have here in the county, which we do not, and looking at other counties such as Lennox and Addington. Seeing that no election sign anywhere on public property, including the street allowance, no election sign on any object or structure, no election sign within a median strip or a traffic island. Bringing this bylaw forward, gives substance to, where and when we can place our election signs. When we put forward the memo back in the previous election, there was no clarification or guidance, even with, some wording about, election signs on private property. Yes, that is one thing to ensure that you have permission from your property owner to place an election sign. But again, this gives more of a fair and, is transparent with candidates and third-party advertisers of, where and when we can consider election signs. And, staff are willing to accept amendments and seek changes in this draft bylaw.
So based on that comment, if you'd like to allow them in public roadways, then you would just have to make a motion to amend the bylaw as presented to whatever you would want. So that's up for debate tonight. Councillor Fody and then Councillor Jameson.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to our clerk. I like what you've created here. I realize it's a draft, but perhaps we should have some public consultation up to and including perhaps the end of July, which would give us May, June, July, another 3 months to work with, and still would be ample time prior to signage being allowed to go up anyway, which would be August 19th, correct?
As of right
Or
now,
20th.
as of right now, when you file your nomination papers, you can put signs up.
Okay, I misunderstood some of that then. I thought, okay, so signs can go up now.
I believe as long as you're a duly noted candidate.
Yes, so the campaign period starts once you file your nomination papers. It really is up to the municipality, whether they have rules about when you can put up election sign or how a sign may be displayed on public property. Again, without a bylaw, we have no way of enforcing when and where signs can be placed. So again, this draft bylaw was brought forward just to consider where council or whether or not council would like to pursue this draft bylaw. I would like to recognize in terms of timing, in my research, it doesn't necessarily have to be, after nomination day. It could be, 30, 45 days prior to voting day. Some municipalities have put that forward in terms of timing of placements of signs.
A follow-up to Councillor Fody and then Councillor Jameson.
Thank you. Well, if that's the case, then I would support this. Because we know from the previous election, it was a free-for-all to some degree. I mean, we had sign poisoning to some effect. But, the fact that as we know, the arrogance of some people telling people what their property boundaries were and what they were not, and you're going to end up with a sign on your lawn, I don't want us to go down that road again. So if that means drafting this and passing this tonight, and then as to Councillor Maybe's question, we could amend anything from here forward, then I'm okay with that. Then I will support this. Thank you.
I think we can make the amendments tonight, actually, before we pass it. So it's just a matter of someone putting forward an amendment. Go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
I just wonder if the idea of just completely banning the use of signs is completely off the table. I know we worry about all kinds of things, but the reality is that yes, it was a horror show here. It wasn't a sign campaign. It was a litter campaign where people went out and dumped litter. And I just think that at the end of the day, it's going to be who we interact with among our residents, whether we're making the calls door to door or whether we're holding events for our various candidates and so on. That's going to make a difference. And proliferation of signs all over the place is just bothers people. And I think I heard that more than anything else with respect to signs the last campaign, to underline Councillor Fody's point. So could we consider just banning signs completely among ourselves as part of this? Because it would certainly stop a lot of enforcement issues here. Because this is, okay, don't 4 inches over here or 5 inches there. I mean, it starts to get very difficult for everybody to or the staff to try to police this thing. So could we consider that, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you.
Again, that would be a motion to amend the sign bylaw, which the one thing that I want to make perfectly clear, we don't have a sign bylaw in this municipality. The planner had made that clear that whether it's signs for elections or any other manner. I see Deputy Mayor here in a second. So what it comes down to is we need to start somewhere. It's up to the council to bring forward an amendment. So I'm going to recognize Deputy Mayor, and then I'm going to recognize Councillor Maybe. We need you to unmute, Deputy Mayor.
Sorry, through you.
There we go. Yep.
Last term, there was a motion passed. I believe it was a bylaw to do with all signage, especially real estate signs, because, you know, they're left out for years. Like, I had signs on the end of my road from real estate agents that were no longer real estate agents. So I mean, there's signs all over the place. They don't allow them on the parkway, but we let them all over the place, whether they're election signs or real estate signs or whatever. Take them down.
Madam Planner, there's, as far as a sign bylaw or a motion otherwise, can you comment on that, please?
Through you, all I was able to find was a discussion leading to a discussion of a resolution, but there is no actual council approved bylaw regarding signs that I've been able to locate.
Okay. So based on that, Deputy Mayor Lackey, should you wish to have a general bylaw enforced for signage, you would need to bring a notice of motion, and you can work with the planner to do that.
Yes, I will.
Okay. So back to the motion at hand. Councillor Maybe, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. And I do remember the conversation that we had at the last council meeting, Deputy Mayor, about that sign bylaw, and that you strictly did say about real estate signs. But more to the point, I think there needs to be amendment, basically the time frame, and I think no signs up until after all nominations are closed. Like for everybody, it's August 19th or 20th or whatever.
August 19th, I think.
Through your worship, just for clarification, it is Friday, August 19th at 2 p.m. If I may, Madam Mayor, I just would like to provide a little bit more clarification. I know Ms. Venditti spoke to a sign bylaw. I have noticed in my research as well that there are a lot of municipalities that have, you know, they do have a sign bylaw in place, but have removed the election signs from the sign bylaw and recreated an election bylaw due to the changes in the Municipal Election Act regarding candidates and also third-party registrations, just to support those new changes in the MEA.
Did have more
So
to that.
it needs to be two separate things. Fair enough. Go ahead.
Also with that, a limit of how many signs at any one intersection. I think that would be maybe more to the point, is we end up getting 6, 8 signs all on a corner of all the same person. And that's where it does end up being a little cluttered. Also, the roads, need to put them on the roads, and that's what it sounds like. It's almost limiting us.
You're looking in the road allowance.
Yeah, the road allowance. And then will this also apply to the federal and provincial signs? No, just municipal signs.
We can only govern municipal.
Just thought I'd ask. Thank you. But I do think we need to amend this bylaw to include some of these points.
So the amendment proposed by Councillor Maybe is to amend the proposed bylaw to allow election signs to be erected after the nomination period closes. which in this particular case is August 19th at 2 p.m., that signs would be allowed in the roadway and that only one sign per location be allowed. So essentially, instead of having 5 signs for the same person on one corner, one. Anyways. So if you want a bigger sign, you need to invest in it. Now, this is the amendment coming forward from Counselor Maybe. I need a seconder on that to debate the amendment. Anybody want to second that motion? Counselor Giroux. Okay, so the amendment as discussed is to limit the time period from the closing of nominations, which would be August 19th, to also limit, to allow signs to be erected in road allowances, as well, only one sign per location. Go ahead, Counselor Foti, comment on that.
Thank you. We're allowed to discuss or comment here.
You're allowed to discuss the amendment.
Right. That's what my intent is.
Okay.
I would support this if we stuck with the original statement of allowing signs after the date of August 19th at 2 p.m.
Yep.
I do like Counselor Jameson's comment about no signs at all. But as I stated a month ago when we first mentioned the subject, I don't want to encumber new people. I'm very adamant about, democracy. I don't want to encumber new candidates from not being able to be exposed, if you will, to the public about putting signs up. But at the same point, this poisoning of roadways is distracting at best. I think if we met the criteria halfway and allowed the signs up, but stuck with the clerk's original intent of keeping it private and such, I'd be more intent to support it.
Go ahead, Counselor Jameson.
Since you spoke to the point I raised, the means with which we can reach people today is very different than it was many years ago when we were depending on getting into print newspapers and all the various things that were going on. We all have access to social media. We all have access to building our own websites. We have all kinds of things that can reach more of the public in a way with the actual messages that individual candidates, not we, but individual candidates might have versus just a sign on the corner saying, vote for Fred. It's just antiquated, and it's a legacy practice, and it is a wasteful practice. And so there's a whole list of reasons why it would be a good idea just to ban them outright. And yes, we might be accused of trying to serve incumbents, but that would mean we would be taking an awful risk thinking that well of ourselves that we're just so strong in the field that we're just going to walk through the door. So signs themselves are the issue on an environmental concern, as well as an actual valuable communications, really valuable at this point. So I will continue to argue against the signs, and I would abstain if we decide to go ahead with signs. I'll abstain, and yes, I'll put up signs because everybody else will, and which means I've just declared my intention. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay, so the amendment at hand. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Counselor Giroux. My apologies.
Through you, Your Worship, with respect to the timing of signs, I think it's actually covered in there under item 6. It says no person shall place a sign before the end of the nomination period. You
So
just
it's
put
already
it, you just put it in a more positive sense, but I think it's already covered. We could eliminate.
I think
We
if
could
you were
eliminate
looking-
that perhaps.
Yeah, we can, it's already in there, so we don't need to have the amendment. So I know we're not supposed to do friendly amendments, but that's an error on our part. So unless the clerk wants to wrap my knuckles, she's fine. Okay. Okay, so the two items that are in the amendment that need to be debated is allowing road signs or allowing signs within a road allowance and only one sign per area. Go ahead.
Just
Well,
as a
that-
follow-up,
I-
just a follow-up, the road allowance is 33 feet from the center. That's the fence line. If we don't have it within that in some of these roads, and I particularly don't put any signs on corners. I put it halfway down a strip between corners. So it stands out a bit more, but it is still on the road allowance, which is that 33 feet. And that's why all of a sudden you take that away. What is left? Because the roadway is 33 feet everywhere. So there is no property left unless you have a private property and somebody who says, yes, you're allowed.
Go ahead, Councilor Fode.
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, a correction. It is not 33 feet everywhere because there's a lot of roads that have never recouped back the new distance. So that would leave another gray area that would be yet to be exploited. So I think we need to color this black and white before we approve it.
Okay, so we're still working with the amendment, yes. So the two things that are on the table for the amendment is to allow signage in a road allowance, and I said that originally, a road allowance. So that would define whatever is the road allowance. It wouldn't necessarily mean that it's 33 feet because a road allowance is what's existing or up to 33 feet, I believe. If the director of operations could correct me if I'm incorrect. The secondary part being that it can be on, what was this? How many signs? Sorry, just and defining the area, I think it's probably within 10 feet or 25 feet within, unless on private property. But this is the thing. So we're gonna get down to brass tacks here. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. What I remember from the last election was that we weren't allowed to put any road signs on township roads. So that left you at corners and along county and provincial roads. And even to the point of having a sign on your vehicle. If you pulled in the parking lot here, the clerk's assistant would tell you to take your vehicle and its sign off the property. So this is, I'm wondering, how do we say an area? So whatever roads we allow, we say within 50 meters of a junction, either way of the junction.
Okay.
It's really down a rabbit hole at this point.
So the other thing is we could defeat the amendment and put the motion back. I'm not saying that it's wrong. It's up for approval or finalization at council next week, correct? So we can always make the changes as of next week. We could solidify things based on the consensus that we've had around this table. Because I realize there's one person who doesn't want any signs. Absolutely. Which is absolutely your prerogative. But the intent would be that if there are any changes to be made to that bylaw, it can be made before it's approved next week at council. So the amendment is still on the floor. What would you like to do, gentlemen? We can do that. Okay, so we can't table an amendment. We can only table a motion, right? Well, I have to ask the seconder if that's, so withdrawn? Okay, so the amendment's withdrawn. So the original motion is on the floor. So the original motion is to pass it as is. Would you like to defer the motion till next week? Is that it? Motion to defer. Okay, seconder. Bodie. To defer to council on May the 9th. Is that correct? Okay. Voting on the motion to defer to May 9th.
So does this mean we have a week for everybody to come to their senses and agree that signs are a bad idea? Just asking your worship.
Yeah, so the motion is to defer for further discussion at council next week on May the 9th. All those in favor of the motion to defer? All those opposed? And we're carried. Okay, pardon? Nope, we have until 9:30, 3 hours. Next motion that's on the floor is moved by Counselor Olkey, seconded by Counselor Jameson, that committee of the whole recommends that council approve the zoning bylaw amendment attached to planning report SR-064-22 as exhibit E to rezone the subject property from highway commercial CH to rural RU to allow the development of a single detached dwelling on the lands. Discussion on the motion. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, and we're carried. Thank you. Next motion on the floor is moved by Counselor Olkey, seconded by Counselor Foti, that the committee of the whole recommends that council approve zoning bylaw and amendment attached to planning report SR-065-22 as exhibit F to rezone subject property from rural RU to rural special exception 52 RU-52 to permit the development of a contractor shop or yard on the lands. Discussion on this motion. Seeing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, and we're carried. Okay. Unfinished business. Any unfinished business? Seeing none, we'll go to other business. Any other business? Go ahead. Counselor, maybe.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's kind of a combination. One of, I believe, the road counter, which I asked about earlier. I had it as a note. The director of director of operations, sorry, Dave, has already said that we are getting a counter on Abrams Road, so that's good. Second one is the 401 light. It's been a couple months since I asked about the 401 light again. If there's any more motion on that coming ahead, since the OPP did recommend that it happen. And then the third thing is, as everybody knows, I work for CBRE, and they had a recent road trip. And so it was a sweet deal. We had a maple syrup tasting contest, and I actually won. So
Nice.
I have an award-winning maple syrup now. Thanks.
All right. Any other business? Go ahead, Councilor Grow.
In terms of other business, or perhaps notice motion, but I would like to, perhaps it's a notice of motion for
Okay.
next week.
So I'll just ask one last time, any other business? Go ahead, Councilor Oakley.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just since it is Emergency Preparedness Week,
Mhm.
I had a call last week, the person who was not involved in the emergency but raised concerns to me. It's things I found out. Our 911 calls go to a calling center in North Bay. And then the recipient of the call in North Bay, the agent, tries to determine the municipality you're in. And then they assign who's ever available to go to the call. The person who made contact with me expressed severe concerns and had some rumors to pass on. I think those rumors were a bit corrosive. Not judging the person, but I think these things need to be explained, and bad rumors need to be quashed. And I want to, first of all, thank the fire chief for assisting me. I did my own investigation of it. The allegation was that the person calling in was challenged about where they lived and was in an argument with the dispatcher. Okay, fact one, or factoid one. What happened was, and the other thing I'll say from my own experience, people who are under stress or feel they're in peril may think they're communicating effectively, but frequently they're not.
Mhm.
And if people are in panic about themselves or someone near to them, that's even, take that exponentially. Okay, that's the scene. In point of fact, following up the investigation, my own investigation, the dispatcher asked the person their address. The person who, I'm going to be discreet here, but they had a view of the Rideau system from somewhere between Sealy's Bay and Morton. They lived there. When asked what their municipality was, they said their street number, which was a private road, When asked their municipality, they said Lansdowne. So the dispatcher spent some time with them to confirm where they actually lived. Okay. The other thing to note is that in the emergency maps that they have the old municipalities listed. So Rear of Leeds and Lansdowne makes sense. Escott makes sense. That's what their maps say. That's a provincial thing to sort out, not us. And apparently they're working on that. They're also working on, you will be able to put in an emergency call with text or email, not just phone. That's the next iteration of the system. Anyway, where I was told that this person had argued to prove where they live, that isn't true. And that discussion with the person making the call and the dispatcher lasted 37 seconds. At the end of that 37 seconds, the ambulance in Elgin was notified. A minute, 20 seconds later, that ambulance was en route, and 13.1 minutes later, it was at the destination. Now, having had an emergency situation involving my own family in the city of Kingston, the ambulance response time in Kingston was no better. Okay, this involved coming down 15, getting on Thomas Road and going on one of the private lanes. So one of my points here is some of these rumors start to circulate and they become somewhat corrosive. And I think we can have a lot of confidence in our emergency services. And this ties back to some of the private road discussions we had. If it's possible for them to get down that road, they'll get there, and they'll get there in a timely manner, whether it's fire, police, ambulance, or all three.
Mhm.
So I just thought I would bring that forward in context, and people should be a little more aware of some of these rumors that circulate. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other business? Go notice of motion. So Councillor Grell has a notice of motion.
And thank you through you, Your Worship. I was proposing a notice of motion to be brought forward next week to direct staff to explore with the building and the completion of the Rockport boat ramp. I'd like staff to investigate the idea for safety reasons to delineate clearly the parking from the Rockport boat line and the roadway, so that two reasons: safety of persons, because we are going to have boats and trailers, and quite understandably, people coming off the buses and the cars, there is no indication of where to be. So it's quite understandable that they often congregate on the road, and they will congregate around the boat ramp, et cetera. So the motion would basically be, for the sake of safety and to support the boat ramp in Rockport, that staff be directed to consider and consult with perhaps the folks down in Rockport as to a barrier clearly delineating, and a physical barrier clearly delineating where boats and trailers are and where people are to be. And it would also serve perhaps as somewhat of a crowd control, if you will, and guiding people to where they ought to be safely. I'll do that next week. Thanks.
Is that, just for my own clarity, is that in conjunction with the Rockport report that was?
Yes, it actually, excuse me, it does follow also from the Rockport report that was done. And it had been discussed of some physical barrier, whether it was plantings, whatever. So it was following on from that, and perhaps we could have a more concrete ideas how staff might approach that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other notices of motion? Any notices of motion? Okay. Mayor's update. Just a point that I was able to attend the Sealy's Bay Lyndhurst Chamber event back in Sealy's Bay, along with my fellow councillors, Olkey and Fody. Councillor Jameson was off gallivanting in the big city, so he wasn't able to be there. But it was great to see a number of businesses out, and a number of businesses that I hadn't met before and didn't know were existing. And these are small, some were small on farm and otherwise. And it was great to see a good turnout. Wendy's fed us, which was absolutely phenomenal. And we're very fortunate to have such talented people in the community. We also were joined by the mayor of Rideau Lakes, Ari Hugenboom. And we had an opportunity to speak as to the things that are important to us when it comes to business and business owners, and also the fact that we work hard in our respective municipalities to be welcoming to those who come to visit us on a more of a seasonal basis, and how we try to keep people here as long as we possibly can. So I also had the opportunity to attend an event at Furnace Falls Farm on Sunday, which was another small business showcase and a very well attended event at Furnace Falls Farm. And I know that Wendy Banks, who runs this particular venue, is looking at doing a number of these sorts of things, as well as doing more concerts as well as weddings. So she's trying to diversify, and so it's really exciting to see out of COVID that the adaptation to make things a little bit different. But she's already got a list of dates already set aside. So if you like live music, please check it out. And I believe that they have booked in mid-June. Katie, I think it's June 5th, is a small business agricultural summit that they're having out at Furnace Falls Farm as well. So if you have the ability to attend that day, I'm sure they'll be happy to see you. Just a reminder that Touch a Truck is on May 17th here in the municipality. We will have a charity barbecue here, and we really do hope that people bring their small little ones out and young at heart who might want to sit in the big rig and pretend they're driving down an icy road, hopefully straight. And that the fire trucks, I believe, will also be on display at that particular time. So we're hoping to have as many people as possible, just to sort of get a better feel for the size of the vehicles that we have, and as many people as we have, and the charity barbecue, which will be raising funds for. Go ahead.
Can I just add that we're going to have OPP and the county and
Oh, great.
EMS here as well?
Wow. So we've got the full gamut. So thank you. So OPP, EMS, and the county will be here alongside of the township. So we look forward to seeing everybody out that night. Long weekend is coming up the end of this month. Well, 3/4 of the way through the month, and we will be swelling in size once again with seasonal residents, and we're very excited to have them back. And this will be our first quote unquote normal summer in the last 2 years. We do appreciate that there are lots of people still wearing masks, and we hope that people are respectful, and you don't know the reason why they're wearing that mask, and it could be them trying to protect you. So we just ask that everybody be as considerate as possible, wash your hands as much as possible. If you feel like wearing a mask to protect yourself and others, please do so. And just another point to say, and I don't know, maybe I haven't paid attention as much this year, but I am astounded at the amount of garbage that is in the roadsides. And I don't know if that's because of the surge in takeout food over COVID or what, but I do know that I'm very grateful for those who have taken time to clean up their respective roadsides and ditches on township roads, in the villages. I know there was a number of groups of people who have been doing that over the last couple of weeks. The township has provided gloves and bags to those who wish to come forward and put the bags on the side of the road or in a designated area for pickup. We do very much appreciate that. It never ceases to amaze me. I don't understand how people can even throw a wrapper out the window. A banana peel I can get, but it's organic, it's gonna break down. But between Tim Hortons cups and garbage and diapers and everything, it's just crazy to me. So please don't litter. And if you do need to, there's 3 dumps in the area. Head there. I'm sure they'll take your stuff. Busy week for me ahead. County Joint Services Committee tomorrow, County Committee of the Whole, and Mapleview Lodge on Thursday. So I'll let you know if there's anything that comes forward from that. And I've also been recruited to be part of the regional tourism strategy. And I will say that the group that they have working on this are big players. They're Destination Canada people. 2031, I believe, is the name of the very competent and capable. Having said that, in the 2 meetings that I've been involved with, both with mayors in Kemptville a week ago, and then having a subsequent meeting with some business owners throughout the counties, I think it is a very large order to try to figure out a strategy to represent all of the types of businesses that are within the region and to market it effectively. Now, stranger things have happened. I'm obviously reserving judgment until I see the final product. But I do think it will be difficult for us to market cohesively from one end of Leeds County to the other end of Grenville and to the north of Grenville. So, but I guess being part of the committee, I get to be part of holding people's feet to the fire to make sure that this is a sound strategy if we're able to get one. But they do have very capable and competent people on the task. My concern is the costs associated with implementing such a strategy and who's going to pay for that and where that would be housed out of. That's my final concern. Also, congratulations to the Leeds Fire Department, Leeds Thousand Islands Fire Department. They had a very successful bullhead supper here. I'm not sure how many we ended up having through in the end, but strangely enough, it was very busy at 3:30 in the afternoon. They had about 160 through by the time I was out of here, but always great to see the group working together, depending on one another, and all the residents that come to support it. So thank you for keeping that tradition alive, especially now that you have ladies allowed. It's an inside joke for many years. It was only men. But anyways, I very much enjoyed dinner on Saturday night. Is there anything that I've missed as far as an update? Other than my extreme glee about the auditor's report, which Kate's already unfortunately gone, but I'll tell you, that was a good day. Seeing none, I'm going to put the motion forward, moved by Councillor Oakey, seconded by Councillor Maybe, that the committee of the whole adjourn. All those in favor? All those opposed? And we're carried. Thank you, everyone.